working. So we are good to go. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for joining us today. Usually we are having webinars on Tuesdays, and since February we have added an additional one on Thursdays because we have so much ground to cover. As you know, for those who are joining us for second, third, or the 19th time as such, and those who are joining us for the first time, this is the Global Compact for Migration webinar series, and it's attached to a certificate program on the Global Compact for Migration, where we have quite a number of students registered on. But also part of this webinar series is to socialize the Global Compact for Migration in diving into the individual objectives. And today we'll be looking at Global Compact for Migration Objective number 19, that looks at diaspora and migrant contributions. And by we, I mean the Cross-Regional Center for Refugees and Migrants, the Global Research Forum on Diaspora and Transnationalism, the International Institute for Migration and Development, Metropolis Asia Pacific, the Migrant Forum in Asia. So these are the co-organizers of the certificate program and this event today, and we're grateful to them for providing this platform. My name is Paddy Siyanga Knudsen, and I'm one of the vice presidents at GRFDT, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. We do know just a bit of housekeeping before we will step in. Yes, indeed, sincere apologies, for those who had issues joining us, but we're glad everyone is able to come through. Thank you for all those greetings that are coming through from various spaces. We see Nigeria and Philippines well represented as well, and our panelists joining us from the UK, joining us from Ghana, and also joining us from Aida, if I'm not mistaken, from Turkey, and so we're really happy to have all our panelists joining us today, but also the participants that are logging in from their various locations. Now, the commitment that was made when the Global Compact for Migration was signed up in 2018 in relation to migrant and diaspora contributions was in the line of creating conditions for migrants and diasporas to fully contribute to sustainable development in all countries. And the commitment text reads, we commit to empower migrants and diaspora to catalyze their development contributions and to harness the benefits of migration as a source of sustainable development, reaffirming that migration is a multidimensional reality of major relevance for the sustainable development of countries of origin, transit, and destination. So we can see that, no country is left out, and rather no migrant contributions are being left out in this space. So with the migrants in their country of, if sustainable development rather is looked at in various spaces, whether we're looking at countries of origin, countries of transit, and countries of destination. And so we see the centerpiece that migrants and diaspora have in terms of development architecture in these spaces. And for us, to deliberate on this topic, we have three panelists. As we said, we have a female cast today. So we have Mandy Preville-Findlay, who is the co-founder of Beyond Iyanola, which is based in the United Kingdom. And we've got Dr. Aida Ibričević, who is a migration and diaspora studies. Let us just try to do a bit of housekeeping rules as we are coming along. It would really be great if we could all turn off our microphones. Very nice to see faces because, of the virtual platform. And I guess people have not seen each other or traveled to meet in different forums. So it's always nice to see a friendly face. But it's great if we can keep our microphones muted so that we can have a smooth flow. Just coming in to finish with our panelists, we also have Aida Ibričević. If I've pronounced it correctly, Aida, you let me know, who is an independent social researcher and consultant based in Sarajevo in Bosnia Herzegovina, and an affiliated global fellow with the Migration Center at the Peace Research Institute in Oslo, as well as a research fellow with the Center for Diaspora Studies, which is in the Sarajevo School of Science and Technology. And we will be sharing more detailed bios as we bring all our panelists joining us. And we also joined today by Theresa Fianko, who is the founder of Diaspora Digital News, and we'll be hearing a bit more about, a lot more about Theresa's important work in the space of communication and information in the space of diaspora news. And so really delighted to have this Power Pack panel, the Stellar panel joining us today. And I think some of the things that we just reflect back on, because we have had the opportunity to look at several elements that are mentioned in this commitment. We have had the opportunity to talk about diaspora, and we have had the opportunity to also dwell a bit into different aspects of the Global Compact for Migration. I mean, we're now at number 19, nearly at the end. We've talked about data. We've looked at issues that are related to trafficking, smuggling. We've also looked at spaces around legal pathways and what that looks like. A week ago, we were looking at social cohesion and inclusion, and we have also dwelt into, vulnerabilities, and also just understanding what access to basic services looks like for migrants. We looked at the need for information. So we just center this conversation, I think, very clearly from the start that, we will be hearing references from our speakers that touch on the different parts of the Global Compact for Migration, because we do know that the Compact does not operate in silo. And in saying that, let me introduce our first speaker. So Mandy will be joining us first. So Mandy Preville-Findlay is the co-founder of Beyond Iyanola, and she is a coach and runs a mentoring company that is based in the United Kingdom, working within various sectors and supporting individuals that are from different professional backgrounds. She's interested in people development. She's an accredited coach, and she's currently working on her PhD in diaspora engagement. Mandy carries many hats and brings a lot of flavor in the work that she does in terms of supporting, tertiary institutions in St. Lucia. So giving her country of origin there, but as well as supporting teachers in various networks. And Beyond Iyanola is a St. Lucian diaspora-focused community organization that is currently based in the United Kingdom, which works to create a movement for development, looking at how do they harness the power of diaspora for homeland progress. So we'll be hearing more about, how do they look at prioritizing and identifying needs. We'll hear more about the importance that they put to the centerpiece on collaboration, and also understanding how, highlighting So, even as you just share with us, just give us a sense of breaking down some of these concepts. I know you and I had an interesting conversation around, who is a migrant and diaspora, but also centering us into the work that you do as a diaspora organization, supporting the St. Lucian community in the United Kingdom. Who really creates these conditions, and what are these requirements? What do you sort of see bringing on the dynamics of the intergenerational engagement and the contributions that they have? And tell us a bit more about what migrant agency has looked like over the years for St. Lucian community. Over to you, Mandy.
Thank you very much, Paddy. Can you hear me clearly? Fabulous. Thank you for this invitation to be a part of this fantastic discussion this morning. I am thrilled that it's an all-female cast because I think it's about time. At the end of the day, we are the ones within the diaspora who will make a difference for our homeland in conjunction with Homeland. I truly believe that. I think that there's so much to be said about diaspora networks. And I know we had a long conversation about how Beyond Iyanola has started. So you've asked me to sort of describe my feelings about it. And I think as a start, I will talk about why we started Beyond Iyanola. So we started in about 2017, when we recognized there was a need for us to band together as a community to sort of teach each other. I'm quite interested in the culture of St. Lucia, and we are deeply rooted in the African French Creole patois type influence, and Masquerade is one of them, one of the institutions that we sort of try to promote. And we found out just by coincidence, that quite a lot of the older generation here in the diaspora didn't know much about it. So we decided that it would be an opportunity to engage them. So we started off just sort of feeling our way through and trying to understand how we can link with St. Lucia to bring that to the fore. And then we realized that actually there's a lot already happening here. So we've got UK 758 who banded together to support St. Vincent when there was the volcanic eruption. We have St. Lucia Association 1963, which has been there quite a long time, 1963. And they were the core members of the St. Lucia diaspora who came up during the Windrush era. And they were thinking about what they could do. There's Friends of St. Lucia, and then we had individuals from the Miku Society, we have Raise Your Voice St. Lucia, etc., who all thought it's about time we do something. And we thought, well, isn't it fantastic that there are people out there who want to do? And why should we reinvent the wheel? If there are organizations that want to band together, then we can be the catalyst to support them. And it's been quite an interesting journey. Another way of celebrating that was through our publications. So we started during 2020, each month having a publication which celebrated a particular part of the diaspora. We started with just one individual, celebrating Mr. and Mrs. Moore of Greenlight Youth Club, and we added in a few other members of diaspora, teachers, lawyers, advocates, just sort of talking about what they can bring to development within St. Lucia. And again, we found that there wasn't one core way of persons being able to engage. So in short, we have found that there's a missing link between the diaspora and the diaspora's ability to support homeland development and our homeland. And we are hoping to find a way to forge that, make it a strong, firm bridge with whomever turns up in government. As you know, every 4 or 5 years, there's another government popping in. So we are hoping that this link that we've started celebrating the brilliance of the diaspora can be forged. So you can learn a bit more about us if you go on to issue.com/Beyond Iyanola. You can see, I think we have about 14 publications out there now. You can also follow us on Facebook at Beyond Iyanola or Instagram or Twitter at Beyond Iyanola, just to read a bit more about what we do. In my professional life, I'm a teacher, and I'll always be a teacher. I think when I was about 5, I made a decision that my role in life was to help people, help them develop, help them become better at what they do. And I've moved from becoming a teacher to a head teacher, supporting schools in their development. And now I work as a education consultant, supporting persons to develop themselves, to move to that next step, to help unpick what makes them tick. In terms of, thank you for that, Paddy. In terms of looking at intergenerational links with diaspora and homeland, I think there's a lot of work to be done. I mentioned earlier about the first sort of organizations, and I'm wondering if other panelists on here can also speak to that, if you're finding this as well. They needed, the first sort of persons who formed organizations, diaspora organizations for St. Lucia, needed to do so. And when I say needed, I think they needed to do it for survival. For all I've read, from all the conversations I've had with hundreds of persons in the diaspora, there was a need to band together and form this diaspora organization for their own personal survival and comfort. Things have evolved over the years, and now persons are choosing whether they want to join, if they need to join, because things have changed, things have moved on, legislation has changed. I'm not saying it's changed for the better, but I think it's changed for the easier. And I'm sure the legal conversation you had a couple of days ago, Paddy, would have touched on that. And we're finding that there still hasn't been a sort of a growth and a movement and a shift away or from. We need to have the dance or have the meeting because we need to decide how we're going to pay our rent, how we're going to survive, how we're going to help X person do Y thing. To we are now in a better place where we can contribute in not just remittance terms, but in terms of our knowledge, capacity for development. How are we going to shift away from this, let me give somebody something, to let us support them to move on in their development. So that's basically where I'm going to stop now, Paddy, because I think I've said a lot there. So for me, intergenerational development of diaspora engagement is a place that needs a lot of unpicking for us to move on.
Thank you, Mandy, for just, picking on that, and very interesting to hear about, the need for survival was what brought about engagement, people coming together in networks from the diaspora point of view. And now sort of the fact that, integration is taking place in different spaces and people are migrating for different reasons as well, how that also should change shape and form. And also quite interesting to hear about the celebration, and I like that word, that it's the celebration of diaspora, because often migrants and may be depicted with sort of this negative image, or the image that they lack agency. So I think it's quite important, how you've unpacked it for us, and also really showing us how diaspora can be this catalyst. So maybe one of my next question to you would sort of be thinking around, other parts. You've talked about legal legislation, for instance, changing, but we also know that in many spaces, we still have limited legal pathways, for instance. We also know that migrants and diaspora still face different types of vulnerabilities. So, vulnerabilities of being, women have certain vulnerabilities. Then, you have the undocumented having different types of vulnerabilities. Refugees and other groups of migrants just find themselves in these situations where they may lack access to social protection, they may lack access to basic services and needs, tied either to their legal identity or the nature of, by just the nature of who they are. And then we also know, and it's an interesting conversation we had around, for instance, discrimination, and the Global Compact calls, for instance, on the elimination of all forms of discrimination. And we even know that diaspora, even those that have been established over years and years, the issue of discrimination often pops up in conversations around diaspora. And then an issue that's related that we also talked about last week on skills recognition. And so I just wanted to bring you, bringing these other parts of the GCM and saying, yes, we can celebrate and we can highlight. But when we talk about, all these different measures that are coming up, talent partnerships, whatever it is that's kind of out there that's trying to show movements, what is sort of your personal take? And I pick one example, skills recognition. What's your personal take on this in terms of how it then relates to the contribution part of it?
Thanks, Paddy. In terms of skills recognition, I think there's something wrong. I'm just going to use that word. When you have an island where Sir Arthur Lewis is the name of the college, where Sir Arthur Lewis is on so many buildings in the UK, departments in universities, where Sir Arthur Lewis is a Nobel laureate, and persons who are from that country, who have studied at that institution, will come into a country like the UK and then have to justify their qualifications. There is an irony in that just doesn't sit well with me. You do what you have to do because that's the procedure, but it is a blatant misuse of power to insist that you then have to get your qualifications reviewed in order for you to apply to do anything. And I know you said earlier that I'm studying a PhD. I'm not quite there yet, Paddy. I'm working on the proposal, looking at diaspora engagement. And yes, I have to get my qualifications as long in the tooth as I am, with A levels, with a first degree from Greenwich, which is in the UK, and with a master's from the Open University in development management. I still have to ensure that my qualifications are reviewed before they can be accepted for me to do a PhD. So there is a blatant misuse of power, that there isn't an acknowledgement and an acceptance that we are on par with any other institution across the world. There seems to be a willingness to take all the positives, to be able to take all the good and the highly skilled work that we bring, but not enough that we are kept on an even keel and that we can sit at the same table. We have to pay entrance fees over and over and over again. And I think it's about time that is brought to the fore and highlighted as quite an unjust thing that needs to happen. There is no reason for it. The other thing about highly skilled is that we've accepted it, that we've accepted that we can only do because we want that high skill net worth to come to the UK or to whichever country that we happen to end up in the first world, as they say. But that comes from home, where we always value the more highly skilled. So the diaspora policy for St. Lucia, for example, talks about human capital. But when you review the human capital section of the diaspora policy, it actually speaks to who can bring back the skills that equates to remittances and net worth. So if we are saying that we want to be valued, then surely we start with us to show that we value what we have. And it's not just the highly skilled that will be given the opportunity to do well. What about the person who's skilled in a technical sense? What about the persons who just wants to have a coaching conversation to support mentoring of younger people? Where is that in terms of what our policy promotes? Now, having said all of that, I'm just going to give an example. Syria education. Janine is doing great stuff developing youth. She is doing it off her own back. She's bringing people together. She's doing a wonderful job. But that is not reflected in our diaspora policy. So which means we are not giving ourselves credit for what we are doing. And in so doing, we are valuing what other people value, not showcasing what we value. So I think as a start, we need to value the social aspects of what we bring to engagement and development, and not just make it about the academics and the remittances sides of things.
Thank you for that quite a very prompt response. And I think what is also very important there is saying that, you know, the value starts at home. The value starts at home. And so basically, how are also we how are the homelands rather also valuing first the workers that are sent out? And that also comes on their return as well, isn't it? So all this concept on upskilling and so on, because the skill is important for you to join the job market, and that job market then determines the contributions. But I also like what you talked about, and maybe we can touch on a bit beyond these skills, beyond what we're sort of seeing as financial skills, because the GCM also talks about that, this non-financial contribution that seems to be lost. I think that since we all heard in the last years that you know, remittances, for instance, exceed ODA in some countries and exceed FDI in some countries, we kind of, governments raise their hands to say, hold on, how do we capture that? How do we mechanize that? But there's so much of social remittances, I think, and human capital and remittances that and contributions, rather, if we put it in that way, that could be seen. So thanks again. And maybe when we come back to you, a question that we'll give to you is sort of to touch a bit on this, the cultural aspects, the, you know, the development programs, the economic diplomacy, I think that we sort of need to see come out of this. You know, what are these conditions at home? Like I said to you, if we have all the boats in place, we have all the good policies, we have all the neat strategies, what exactly is missing? And of course, we want to talk about it because of the context that we have in reviewing the possibility to review the Global Compact for Migration's objective that is set up in a different calendar altogether. But, you know, we would like to bring in these contributions. So thanks again, Mandy. Let's move to the digital space and just have a conversation with Theresa. And I think it's Theresa, we have on this forum also kind of touched on many different aspects of information. And when we talk about information and communication, we are talking about information that's available to migrants throughout their journey. That's one of the objectives. But also, you know, migrants, you know, as Mandy has highlighted, how we celebrate contributions, but also the need to have information that gives that balanced view of migration. And, you know, and as let me introduce you and then give you the question. So Theresa is a media and marketing communications professional who has lived and worked in the diaspora. She's lived in Dubai for over 13 years, and she's from Ghana, from the smiling coast of the continent. And in 2019, she started Diaspora Digital News as a way of promoting diaspora engagement and expertise through media communications. And also she has, you know, this firsthand experience on how global diaspora communities thrive and the challenges that they face, and really trying to use this platform to positively project stories and activities of stakeholders in diaspora and migration ecosystem. I really like this. And so, Theresa, even as we bring you on, what do you sort of see as the role of media, and particularly digital media, in shaping perceptions of migrants and migration, and the kind of contributions that they make in all the different spaces? You know, and maybe do you want to talk to us a little bit about what you see, the agenda aspect of it as well, if you want to plug it in, and then I bring you home and talk about, maybe tell us a bit more about what we saw. You know, there was a point in time, and you can tell us a bit more about Ghana's year of return, and we've also heard about the beyond the return, and what role did the media sort of play in kind of shaping this, because this is kind of an important part of seeing migrant contribution and diaspora contribution. Over to you, Theresa.
Thank you very much, Paddy, and thank you for the opportunity. Hello, everyone. So when it comes to the power of the media in shaping narratives, there are different angles in which we can look at. Okay, so let's focus on new media, for example. And new media, I'm referring to social media platform, virtual platform, websites, audio, email, and the likes. And we all know that digitization has really changed how we live, how we work, how we engage, not only for, it's global. So for people in the diaspora as well, especially considering what happened during COVID, and there was a lockdown, there were issues with mobility, and everything had to be virtual. And so after that, things have not changed that much. In fact, there has been an increase in online activity, about 25%, as at 2021, which is last year. And so when we are talking about migration and diaspora, and when we want to bring the media into all that, we can refer to the Global Compact on Migration, 19 that we are talking about, creating conditions for migrants and the diaspora to fully contribute to sustainable development in all their countries. And number 3 also talks about providing accurate and timely information for all stages of migration. And to be able to combine these two, to be able to achieve the objectives of these two, one of the ways we can do that is by effective diaspora engagement. And that is where media communications come in. And in terms of relevance, I'll say new media communications, referring to the virtual platforms. So now people use new media communication to exchange information, to gain knowledge. So it has shaped the way people interact generally in terms of communication, unlike what we used to have about 20 years ago. And so when you look at social media, for example, the stakeholders in the migration industry, like individuals, like communities, like governments, they all have social media accounts. I'm sure most of us, almost all of us have social media accounts to get information, to engage, to interact, even for entertainment, depending on how you want to use it. And there's digital diplomacy also now on the rise, because everything is being done virtually. The human touch, of course, it's important, but then everything is being done virtually. And so we cannot ignore the power of media communication, especially when it comes to these new media platforms. So I'm from Ghana originally, and so I'll use a few Ghanaian examples. Like Paddy said, the year of return in 2019, a lot of people heard about it globally via media. Let's say traditional media, even if we're to use the traditional media, it got a lot of attention, a lot of patronage. Almost all the big media houses we know globally wrote about it. And, you know, everyone was checking out, where is Ghana? What's happening in Ghana? It was trending everywhere on social media. And so it brought a positive light to what people would think about Ghana. People especially African Americans in the diaspora, they felt Ghana was their home. They should come home. And a lot of them did. The initiative was really huge. And right after, Beyond the Return was launched, because the government realized that this is going to work, and a lot of people bought into it. Not only African Americans, there were people from all over the world who joined the Year of Return. Actually, I also got my inspiration for Diaspora Digital from the Year of Return. I've always wanted to use media as a tool to positively, impact, shape the minds of people. Because growing up, even in Ghana, I grew up in Ghana till I was about the very early 20s. That's when I got an offer and I left. So during those times, watching TV all the time, because I really love to watch TV, I really love to listen to radio. And then you will see videos of other African countries which had war, and then they would be called war-torn countries. And, so even as a child, I used to have this impression about a few countries, which I wouldn't want to mention, that you would think there was nothing good out of there. But that is what the media showed us, and that is what we bought. But unfortunately, it kind of gave the impression that the whole of Africa was like that. And I didn't know until I left the shores of Ghana and I went to the UAE. And that's when I realized that, oh, people thought, oh, wow, you can speak English. Oh, wow, you have a degree. Like, people thought there was nothing in Africa, and before it was like a shock, like, wow, you could check online or, but that's what the media has sold to people, and people bought it. And so I thought, well, if the media can be used that way, then we can use it in another way. But then the best way to do that is through people who are from Africa. That's using the African example, who are from Africa, and they can tell the story through the eyes of Africans, with a global platform. And so when the Year of Return came and I realized how much media attention it had garnered, I thought, wow, I could do a platform like that. So that's how come I started Diaspora Digital News. Initially, I was focusing on the African diaspora, which didn't really come very easily. But then I got a global audience. We have worked with people from every continent where people live on the planet. And what we do is that we project the positive stories of people in the diaspora, organizations, their events, their food, their culture, and their community engagement efforts that they are doing in their countries of origin and back in their homelands as well. So we see that usually diaspora engagement is focused mainly on remittance. Well, that has changed a bit now. But then if you're talking about shaping narratives, even on individual basis, when in my diaspora experience, I realized that if I meet people from a particular country and they do the same kind of things, let's say 5 different people do the same kind of things, automatically I feel, oh, people from this country should be like this, should be like that. So diaspora engagement should start from the individual. Governments should not only be interested in, oh, how much can you send? Oh, how much can you invest $1 million in real estate? No, it should start from the well-being of the individual. If people think, oh, people from your country, they are like the last on the ladder. You see them, they don't look well, and the impression is that, oh, your country is poor, or it's a bad impression. So engagement should be holistic from the individuals, and that will form the community groups, which usually also they don't have a budget to share information, to kind of communicate what they have to. But then social media also is free. There are Facebook groups for diasporas, and they can have Zoom meetings. I mean, even this panel session we are having, we are leveraging the power of digital media. And so, yes, now governments can have roundtables and town halls and, virtually. There's no need to gather all people from all 5 continents or all 7 continents together and then talk. But no, there could be virtual roundtables where individuals or communities can tell the government directly what they think they can bring on board. It shouldn't always be about what they can give, but what they can get also. And it would not always be financial. It could be in different ways. Maybe they need support. During the COVID, I was in Dubai the whole time from when COVID started until, and I saw how communities, like countries, how they help the people from their countries. And I saw how others didn't, so I realized that, no, there should be a disconnect somewhere. So diaspora engagement should be holistic, and communications is like really key. And it doesn't have to be expensive now that we have new media platforms. It's very easy to communicate by video, by emails, by WhatsApp groups. It shouldn't be difficult. So yes, what we see on the media, and it's true that people use media digitization like negatively. We're talking about using it as a weapon to, spread misinformation or data privacy and all that. But it depends. Like everything, you can choose what you want to use it for, how you want to leverage it, and how you want to benefit from it. So I think if you really want to achieve this objective of the Global Compact on Migration 19, creating sustainable development, we should really consider and promote the use of new media platforms. It shouldn't be like an everyday thing. Now it's like, if there's no internet, then everyone is going hyper. And so we think it's like a right and it's a way of life. But if we really think about it, there's a lot we can do about diaspora engagement using the new media platform. So yes, it's really important in shaping narratives in diaspora engagement.
Thank you, Theresa. You actually already touched on what was going to be my next question to you, but I think that when we come back to you later on, it would also be interesting, to sort of hear some of the hurdles that you face. I mean, in terms of trying to navigate the space of highlighting positive stories, and also I think an interesting angle to sort of see who seems to be the traffic, when you look at the traffic, and I don't know how you're able to profile that from your audience, who's really interested in the information about about diaspora, because sometimes we're also finding, is there a space for us to learn as transnational communities? You've just talked about engagement during COVID and looking at how maybe one community has helped to highlight, has helped to navigate an issue that was related, for instance, to remittances. They found a mechanism in which they could still be able to send money home. And then just by, listening to each other's stories and exchanging information, we find that's the way we never really thought about. But then, so how do we kind of use digital platforms also to kind of bring these kind of best practices out together, because that's one of the things, for instance, that's really kind of highlighted in terms of bringing out diaspora in periods particularly of crisis as well, beyond looking at these very, so when we talk about these conditions, we've gone away, if you like, from the natural ones that are looked at in the space of, governments creating mechanisms, but actually looking at diaspora and migrants as agencies. So maybe we can hear a bit more about, those when we come back to you in a minute. And now
Sure.
we will cross over to another side of this conversation and go to the world of research. And really glad that we have Aida joining us. And we're also crossing over regions. So we're coming to the Balkans and, trying to just get an understanding in this space as well, what that, these kind of conditions, the requirements, the big ambitions that the GCM has around diaspora diaspora contribution and migrant contribution. And as I introduce, Dr. Aida is, like I mentioned, is an independent social science researcher, and she is based out of Bosnia Herzegovina in Sarajevo, and affiliated to the Migration Center at the Peace Research Institute, as well as the Center for Diaspora Studies at the schools at the Sarajevo School of Science and Technology. She's contributed to a wide range of publications, and just picking some that really look at, for instance, the German project on trajectories of reintegration, trying to understand what the impact of forced displacement, migration, and return has on social change. And she has also worked extensively with the United Nations Development Program's project on diaspora for development in Bosnia, and she has done a lot of peer reviewing, wide range of interests in terms of her areas of research, but particularly looking at how emotions relate to politics and the connections between citizenship, home, and belonging. We will be able to share her long bio with you, because I think that there are very interesting nuggets in there to learn about Aida, who has also been working and involved as a community organizer and an expert analyst with a number of diaspora groups in Europe and in North America from her country, really looking at how do we really engage with policy formulation around diaspora and many other spaces. And so, you know, we had an interesting conversation, Aida, when we were preparing for this. And, you know, I think it would be good for us if you just come and situate us into the Western Balkans and have that focus then on Bosnia. You know, we know these national implementation plans, vast and wide, but we also know there's an issue around that global and the local, or rather the trans-state convergence and the disconnections that we see. Could you just center for us also in there a bit of migrant agency, you know, according to the research that you have done, you know, what is sort of really happening around CSO migrants and diaspora groups, and how can they kind of communicate you know, these very well-felt intentions and well-felt thoughts and reflections out into this global space. So over to you to share with us, Aida.
Thank you so much, Paddy, and thank you so much for inviting me to contribute to this fantastic panel. It's a wonderful honor to discuss these important issues with such distinguished colleagues from around the world and all audience members joining this webinar. So hello, everyone. I'm going to link my presentation to what Mandy said as one of the key aspects of her work, which is creating that missing link between diaspora engagement and whatever government is in power in the home state. As far as I understood, that was key to what your organization is trying to accomplish. And also I'm going to touch upon digital platforms as well that Theresa talked about. So I will structure my presentation, as Paddy said, around the question of creating connections between global intentions of Objective 19 actions and the local context. I will illustrate these connections with the example of Bosnia Herzegovina, also referred to by the acronyms BIH, and its diaspora. Firstly, I will give a brief snapshot of the case country and the diaspora, with a particular emphasis on current obstruction to coherent state functioning in various areas, including BIH diaspora engagement. Next, I will examine actors such as diaspora migrant groups active worldwide and individual initiatives of host states in the field of BIH diaspora engagement. Finally, I will look at particular characteristics of projects and initiatives and link these to Objective 19 actions. So the case country that I'm going to be discussing with you today is Bosnia and Herzegovina. It is a signatory country to the Global Compact for Migration. I'm going to start off by firstly discussing the BIH diaspora. So this is close to 2 million people originating from Bosnia and Herzegovina who live and work outside of state borders. This number is an estimate based on census data of various host states and includes the second generation, which may or may not have BIH citizenship. This number is high in absolute terms, but particularly high relative to the resident population. Current estimates place BIH at the top of net immigration countries in Europe, even ahead of Albania, and amongst the highest net immigration countries in the world, with over 50% of its population living abroad. Although completely accurate data on the composition of BIH diaspora does not exist, according to the BIH diaspora mapping exercise from 2018, it is estimated that the majority of BIH diaspora is conflict generated, created mainly as a result of forced migration from the 1990s wars. However, to this number, we should add all people of Bosnian origin, the so-called Gastarbeiter, who emigrated before the war for economic reasons and settled in countries of Western Europe, mostly Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. The post-war outmigration, especially of young and highly educated people from BIH, continued largely due to pervasive corruption, political instability, lack of business and educational opportunities, and an underdeveloped healthcare system. The main host states for the Bosnian Herzegovinian diaspora are the neighboring states of Croatia and Serbia, with Germany, Austria, the US, Slovenia, Sweden, Switzerland, Canada, and Australia comprising a list of top 10 destination countries. The contribution of diasporas around the world are often expressed as the speakers told before me, through remittances. But as we know, the diasporic contribution certainly does not end there. However, the BIH case in terms of remittances is particularly interesting because, for example, BIH remittances are, depending on the year, 6 times the amount of total FDI, which might give you an idea of the importance of remittances for the overall BIH economy. According to official data from the World Bank, the BIH diaspora remits close to USD 2 billion each year, which is 10 to 12% of GDP. However, unofficial data on both remittances, diaspora consumption during return visits, as well as direct investment by the BIH diaspora in the country are significantly higher. I'd like to talk a little bit about the Vih State Structure, which is primarily determined by the Dayton Peace Agreement, which is a peace agreement signed 26 years ago, which stopped a very bloody war, but did not create the conditions for a prosperous peace. It is one of the world's most complicated governmental setups based on ethnic power sharing with 2 entities, the predominantly Croat and Bosniak Federation of Bosnia Herzegovina, and the mostly Serb-populated Republika Srpska. 10 cantons in the federation and a total of 143 municipalities in the country. There are a number of different government offices responsible for diaspora engagement, but the Ministry of Human Rights and Refugees with its diaspora sector is the most prominent at the state level. With all these various overlapping competencies and a highly, highly complicated and decentralized state structure, there are many difficulties in the implementation of national diaspora engagement strategies. There's state fragmentation and obstruction to functioning state institution. I'll briefly talk about the current crisis of constitutional electoral reform in Bosnia Herzegovina, which is characterized by ethno-nationalism and separatist tendencies, threats of renewed violence, with the BIH entity RS National Assembly passing legislation for the formation of parallel institutions with secessionary ambitions. There's also an underway effort to create what is called electoral reform and create what is referred to as a third entity that is mainly led by and voiced by Dragan Čović of the HDZ. There's rampant corruption in the country, which continues and intensifies immigration. Now, within this setup, this is how I'm connecting to my presentation to what Mandy was talking about. There's an absence of coherent and strong state-led diaspora engagement strategy and national implementation plans. So the question is, who fills the void? Well, who fills the void? I'd like to first talk about diaspora groups worldwide. And next, I'm going to talk about various individual governments and international organizations taking initiative in this space. In terms of diaspora groups that are Bosnian diaspora groups that are active internationally, there are really numerous examples. They exist, many of them in all the host state countries, all the host states where Bosnian diaspora resides. There are many examples of active diaspora groups worldwide, but I would like to focus on 2 individual ones. One is Diaspora, iPlatform, which is based in Switzerland, funded by the Swiss government, Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, the SDC, and its activities in relation to GCM Objective actions. I'd like to focus on digital platforms for diaspora cooperation. This is where I'd like to link to my presentation to what Theresa was saying on digital platforms. This links to Action 5, for example, Action F, of the Objective 19 of the Global Compact for Migration. In addition to this group, I'd like to talk about the Working Group for Bosnia Herzegovina, which is based in the United States, primarily a volunteer association of Bosnian American leaders and global allies pursuing alignment of pro-Bosnia and Herzegovina policies among relevant stakeholders and communities. Its mission is to be an effective, inclusive, and transparent organization dedicated to a democratic, secure, and sovereign state of Bosnia Herzegovina with territorial integrity, ensuring equal rights for all its citizens. Its 4 areas of priority are NATO membership for Bosnia, EU accession and Euro-Atlantic integration, combating genocide denial and the glorification of convicted war criminals, constitutional electoral reform based on equality under the law. So this activity I would like to use as an illustration of Action G of Objective 19 of the Global Compact for Migration. Lastly, I will talk about individual governments and international organizations and some projects that illustrate this and how they relate again to Objective 19 of the GCM. Firstly, I'll discuss Diaspora for Development that I was involved with, as Paddy discussed in the introduction. It is funded by the SDC, the Swiss Development Cooperation Agency, the UNDP, the United Nations Development Programme, the IOM, International Organization for Migration, and also with participation of, as I mentioned before, the main institution assigned with projects on diaspora engagements, which is the BIH Ministry of Human Rights and Refugees. The budget of this program was 5.7 million, and it ran in a time frame of about 5 years. So two main activities that they pursued, as they are related to Objective 19 of the GCM, are mapping the BIH diaspora, which is a mixed method study conducted in 2018 to map the BIH diaspora in 10 host countries, comprising main demographic elements. And this is linked to Action J of the Objective 19, and then a knowledge transfer program, which is a series of lectures, discussions, and exchanges with prominent diaspora members, such as academics, scientists, artists, medical doctors, writers, entrepreneurs, and other professionals, and host institutions in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The main idea of the program is for active knowledge transfer to take place and for future cooperation agreements to be formed. This activity is linked to Action C of the Objective 19 and Action I of Objective 19. Finally, lastly, very briefly, I'm going to discuss the Diaspora Invest project run by the USAID and funded by the US government with a budget of $6.6 million, which generated more than 22 million in direct investment by BIH diaspora in the country. It ran again for 5 years, from 2017 to 2021, and its project activities were there to facilitate diaspora investment in country of origin, matching diaspora investors with business opportunities in BIH. This activity I'm using as an illustration of Action E of Objective 19 of the Global Compact for Migration. So here I'd like to end my presentation and then leave it for questions and discussion. Thank you once again.
Thank you. Thanks again, Aida, for going into this. One of the things that you sort of mentioned, you know, as you were giving us, you know, situating us into BIH, is also kind of trying to understand what the politics at home are like in terms of engagement. So it's very interesting, I think, to hear about these projects that also seem to be very much donor funded and heavy on donor investment. But then I'm also kind of wondering, apart from the engagement that you would, you know, investment that is coming from government as well to create these conditions. So of course they have a role in legislation and so on and so forth. But to what extent do you sort of see them taking that step forward? Because, you know, SDC, UNDP, the EU, and in many other places, I think BHI is not special in that way, that you have a lot of donor funds that comes to facilitate the creation of conditions, very much like to GCM 19, where we talk about migration and development, right? So kind of trying to make these, but also in the space of BIH, that proximity to the EU and what kind of that sort of means. And so two questions that I have for you. One, to talk about maybe a bit more about what you sort of see as what creates difficulty, I think, for migrants or for migrants and for diaspora to be able to contribute within this political context, you know, as you took us back to what the history was like in terms of the first, you know, the initial migrations. So what does that, you know, we already have that as at the back of our minds, but also secondly, to see something about government agency in terms of not just creating conditions in the legal aspect, but also being able to stand in front and say, yes, 50%, we're getting 50% of our people living abroad and a huge amount that's coming. How are we taking care of them?
Thank you for those two questions. Yeah, the first one, creating difficulties for diaspora to contribute. Of course, this is central to my presentation. I mean, we have a highly fragmented state. We have a deeply divided society. Those same divisions do exist in the diaspora, but also, interestingly, they are often transcended in the diaspora as well. Where, for example, and this is true for the entire Western Balkans region, where very often people originating from what was referred to as Yugoslavia, former Yugoslavia, now are referred to as Yugoslavs, regardless of whether they're from Serbia or Croatia or from Bosnia and Herzegovina, sometimes even from Kosovo and so forth. They're referred to as Yugoslavs by the host state population. So this can be a cohesive factor as well. So within this context, I would like to talk about various peace activism of the diaspora groups that is not in any way donor funded, that is entirely dependent on pure diaspora and migrant agencies, and within that, the peace protest organized by BIH diaspora groups worldwide on January 10th to protest the various secessionary tendencies within Bosnia, and also to urge for action of the various host states, particularly within the EU and the United States and Australia. Also, advocacy and outreach to government officials, host states, and BIH, for example, as I spoke earlier about the working group for Bosnia Herzegovina sending a letter to the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Neighborhood Policy, Joseph Borrell, urging him and other EU officials, including European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, to get more involved in responding to the current crisis in BIH. According to the letter, the European Union should focus its activities on sanctions against those who pose a threat to peace, ensure the strengthening of the European peacekeeping force mission, and provide strong public support to the authority and decisions of the Office of the High Representative. So these are examples of advocacy, peace activism, also future examples of peace activism. March 1, which marks BIH's Independence Day, is going to be celebrated worldwide by various diaspora groups. And in addition to that, March 6th, which is an interesting new sort of date to the Bosnian calendar, which is a day of gratitude of the diaspora groups, paying gratitude to the host states for accepting them in times of greatest need. So in terms of how much of this is driven by the diaspora groups themselves versus donor funded, yes, much of it is donor funded, as you very accurately pointed out yourself. But peace activism of this type, such as protests and so forth, do come endogenously and are linked to political activism of those groups. And as for your second question, I'm not sure I answered it. If you can just repeat the second question, I'm not sure I got that one.
No, I think the second question, I think you've answered it sort of in terms of the migrant agency as well. But then maybe to just bring in then the aspect of where you've got the creating of the conditions, right? So we've got government obviously having that legislative hand, whether it's, you know, citizenship related, whether it's in the space of investment, whether it's the possibility to come and contribute and, you know, return home temporarily to do some work and so on. You've got different mechanisms, I think, and models in terms of how diaspora contribute. But beyond sort of the non-financial means, it seems as though there's such a big connection then to the big donors to finance and create these conditions. But do you see spaces in which actually government is sort of going ahead through its diaspora unit and sort of saying, because we've come up with a strategic plan, we're also ready to front load so much financing that will kind of attract matching funds that will come from the diaspora. So sort of looking for public-private partnerships, if I could put it more clearly.
I understand, but to my knowledge, there are plans to do that, but still to put it on the budget officially. For example, the knowledge transfer program, which was funded through this Diaspora for Development program, which was primarily funded by the SDC and the Swiss government, but also with funding from UNDP and IOM. There was a small part of that total program budget provided by the Bosnian government, and to ensure sustainability of the knowledge transfer program, there were plans to actually put it on to the annual budget. What is happening with that exactly right now, because the program just ended in 2021, end of 2021, so it's early to say whether that will be implemented or not. Of course, in order for it to be sustainable, it cannot be donor funded forever. The national government has to step in, but except that the national government itself is in such crisis that various areas of its activities, including diaspora engagement, that, well, we'll see what happens. It might be too early to tell because the program just ended December 21, so it's only been, what, 2 months?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that.
Okay.
Thank you, Aida. And I think you've raised a very important point where we're talking about sustainability of conditions, because I think, you know, when we have had discussions around many other aspects of the GCM, what we sort of see is that there's a very big assumption around how government drives the process, because we do know that, for instance, the GCM and all the implementation plans, the priority plans that are made at the national level are driven by governments, with a very big assumption that, of course, financing of initiatives, financing of different projects that are going is a natural attraction for donors and so on. So at the end of the day, you know, one wonders, you know, who is really in the driving seat, you know, just to put it out there. But maybe bringing back our panelists, that could be a food for thought. Let's just open the floor for some questions, because we know that we have an audience of 67 participants today, and we'd just like to hear from you, the questions that you have that are burning and on this particular topic. And you just raise your hand so that we're able to call you to unmute you. But I think we've actually done the unmuting, so you could just go ahead and raise your hand and ask your question. I'll just look in the chat and see if we have any questions. Mr. Bese, are you ready to contribute with your reflections or questions?
Okay, thank you very much, Paddy. And thank you very much, all contributors, especially talking about my able neighbor partner living around Konami here. What I want to say is you have a situation whereby every country is talking about remittance. Bosnia is talking about remittance. The Balkan region is talking about remittance. Africans, remittance. Everybody is talking about remittance. You rightly asked a question here, and I want to echo it. What happened when country of origin, when those diasporas, when those migrants, those in diaspora are having issues? How do we help them out? Because I know of my country, they have a problem. It was very hard before the government now send aircraft to go and airlift them and bring them back home. What do we do? Are we more concentrating on remittance without thinking about taking care of a migrant because they're in a place that we believe that is a greener pasture? That's my question.
That's a good question. Thank you. Benedict?
Thank you, Madam, for the opportunity. So my question basically is considering our situations of refugees. Hello?
We can hear you, Benedict. Go ahead. I think we just lost your audio, Benedict. Can you hear us? Otherwise, you could turn off your video, and then maybe that may improve the audio. And maybe while Benedict is coming on, do we have any of the panelists who would like to kind of tackle the question, are we only interested in the contributions, or are we also, to what extent are we making sure that the conditions where migrants are coming from and when they are in crisis, that support is there? I don't know, from St. Lucia or from Bosnia, and also even from the interaction that you have seen, Theresa, on your platform. Any reflections to this?
I
Mandy, you can
definitely
go
believe.
ahead.
Thank you. Thanks for the question, Bassi. I definitely think it's an important one. This came to the fore during, the beginning of the pandemic, where we all of a sudden went from interacting daily with persons in the diaspora to nothing. And to this day, we still don't know if everybody made it through or who made it through, because we still haven't been able to reconnect with some persons, and there hasn't been a coordinated approach to find out how persons have fared during this time. And it is a question that has come up time and time again. Are we just cash machines, or is there something wider, more socially conducive that needs to be brought to the fore? So it is a question that has come up time and time again. It is something that we have been reviewing and thinking about how we connect, which again is why we celebrate and we're building this network, so that there is someone you can call on if you're worried about, one person or the other. And I think that it's a very important question that needs to be forwarded. So in terms of St. Lucia, we've got a High Commission. We also have, and that was something I wanted to bring up based on Aida's point about who fills the void. That really connected for me, because we have something called I think it's called Unity of St. Lucian Overseas Associations. The main office is based in I think it's Canada or the States. And we do have a diaspora ambassador, and we have embassies and high commissions, but there isn't one coordinated approach, which I think is going to be developed through the diaspora ambassador. But my question to all of this is, if we are connecting with groups, who's connecting with people? Because not all people are in groups. all right, or association. So I'm going to leave it at there for now.
Oh, great. I think that's an important reflection of the diversity that's there in diaspora as well. Thank you, Mandy. Aida.
Yes, thank you so much for the question, such an important question. And I would like to tie to what Mandy was saying about who fills the void. And it just is a question of how big this void is, depending on, what kind of state are we talking about and what type of consular presence, let's say, the state has in various host countries and destination countries. So, of course, the natural place to look would be the consular services and so forth. But when we're talking about states that are not particularly strong, that have inherent weaknesses, such as the one that I used as my case study, you will see that the void is quite large. And in fact, who is there to support the people, the individuals, who definitely should not be treated as cash machines, because if they are, they're going to stop being cash machines. Guess what's going to happen? Because nobody's going to continue doing that forever. So there needs to be a kind of two-way street. There needs to be trust building if you want to rely on these remittances for a considerable period of time. So who fills the void? Very often these are solidarity groups that are internally driven. They're family networks. They're again networks within migrant communities that are not necessarily organized as official organizations and so forth. So they're there to support each other. I cannot give you exact data on what happened with COVID-19 in terms of Bosnian citizens abroad. I would have to research this point more to actually give you good, accurate information to answer your question, but it's certainly a very valid one. My research is on external voting as a mechanism for escaping the cash machine kind of a situation for migrants, where they need to be enfranchised to actually have a voice, a political voice in the home state. So I can talk more about that. But in this terms of just sort of reciprocity between the home state and the individual migrant in economic terms, I don't have very good empirical data to support what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. Aida, we may come back to you actually on that one, because that's one of the questions I think that has been raised, and of course is also something that's kind of highlighted, the fact that contributions, of course, migrants and diaspora have agency in terms of contributions that are going towards the homeland, whether you have a mechanism or not. And I think you've just pointed it out as well, to say that even in spaces where there is no mechanism, there is an established mechanism, because there is a family, because the journey begins with your tie to your family, and the family is then extended to this community, the community which is in space as a village which sort of grows into, until you get to a whole of society. But I think in that said, there's also a space for personal philanthropy, for instance, that is often missed out from the bigger picture of philanthropy, right? And how that kind of works. But then it was a comment that was made in another space where we were to say that sometimes people have left home because of the difficult political situation, and therefore it becomes very difficult then to navigate back. So a perfect example is a country that is in some kind of a political crisis where there's just divisions within that state, and then you have a minister of finance or a minister of development coming to visit you in another country and visiting its diaspora. The people who would definitely attend as that diaspora to that meeting may ask one or two questions around the alignment of that particular minister, because in some countries these are political appointments, and because some of the speeches are kind of print, right? It's the manifesto of the ruling party, or the manifesto of the party that maybe is not in favor of all the diaspora members. So I think the part of the political parties is an important condition that may not have been written down, but we should discuss further. So I'll come back to you, Aida, on that one, because I think it's important to pick it. I see we have 3 hands, but let me just ask Theresa to react very quickly, and then we have Oludare and we have Miss Grace.
Well,
Theresa, go ahead.
Yeah, usually, especially in developing countries, a lot of people connect migration to economic factors. So, for example, once you get on or off the plane, you get questions like, "Oh, what did you bring?" Or people always connect economic to migration, and so it's only normal that governments will also focus on remittance. It's really normal. So that's why it's okay. It's you have to bring engagement to the people whichever way. That's why I was talking about social media and all that, having virtual town halls and, you know, things that people can. And sometimes also migration appears too academic, not very practical. Maybe you have a room of people from different walks of life. You have domestic workers, you have people in the corporate world. And then there's a presentation with graphs and charts, and it's okay, it's good, but it's not really, people of a certain level cannot connect. And they're also part of the diaspora, and you need to engage them. They are a representation of your country. And so it shouldn't be too academic, it should be practical, it should be relevant, whether you're using media, whichever means you're using it. And it's all in the mindset, actually. So if we can shape the mind to think that migration should not always be about economic factors, and there are other things to look at about art and culture. Even you can go back to your home country without money, but there's a value you can add that can help. So if we start having conversations like that, instead of always talking about, oh, and money, and that, it's important, of course, money is really important in everything, but I think we can change the narrative a bit. But I think it's happening. Well, at least for Diaspora Digital, we don't focus on remittance. We try to do like a magazine style of, you know, storytelling. So yeah, that would be my little contribution.
Thank you, Theresa. And I think a very important question there we all forget, actually. Yes, what did you bring for me? What did you bring? That's the arrival question. What did you bring? And so maybe we should be packaging these conversations in what can we bring apart from money? I think it's a good reflection you've brought to us, and making it much more practical. And also I think the gender aspect. And on that, actually, maybe I call on Ms. Grace, who is a former ambassador from the Philippines. And we know that the Philippines have elevated the role of women in migration. So, you know, really transforming the face and the image and the identity that's given to domestic workers because of the importance that female migrants have had to the economy. And that recognition goes all the way up. But I shouldn't be speaking. I should let Ms. Grace. I just wanted to put it in there so that she can tell us just a little bit more as she asks her question or reflection. Ms. Grace.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Paddy, and all the panelists. Yes, as has been mentioned, the Philippines is a bit, we're very proactive because our migrants are very proactive too. And I think, as I've mentioned the other time, our president just recently signed a new law creating the Department of Migrant Workers. And yes, of 110 million Filipinos, 10 million are abroad, 5 million are permanent residents, 5 million are labor migrants. And of the 5 million, more than 2.5 are women. And it has been my advocacy too since I was ambassador in Abu Dhabi and even in the Vatican to really do the gender perspective of migration. So yeah, remittances. Our remittances form more than 10% of our GDP, I think. But now we're going to have presidential elections again. In 2016, our diaspora was a tipping vote somehow for President Duterte. Now we have another election. So in the two organizations I'm engaged with, we're trying to remind our overseas Filipinos that they just don't send money. They also bring in with themselves, their families, their community, political and social remittances. So right now there's an ongoing Zoom meetings and just education that saying, hey guys, you know, you should vote for a president or senators who think about you as human beings, not just as money machines. And of course, the candidates are talking about migration by choice. And so we're telling them, please vote properly so that even if we do have the migration department, that you don't have to go if you don't have to go. And that's why I continue the engagement with this group, and I'm learning a lot. And thank you so much, ladies. Miss Mandy, happy birthday again. And I'm taking my migration studies too, Madam, what's this, Aida and Theresa. Are the Filipinos on the Diaspora Digital News? Because we are #1 in the use of social media. So really, with all of this information, I hope to be able to give out this information. I'll be talking to to some of them on February 26th. Especially, I was 12 years in the Middle East and 4 years in Geneva, my multilateral. So I was there for the high-level dialogue in New York. I was in the GFMD, and now I'm a student. So I think I have the three hats of an academic, activist, like we said the other day. And I hope to study more on the migration data, Paddy, that you said. I'd rather not have all these estimates, but real data. Dr. Binood, thank you for, I'm also in a classroom mode. I have 3 online classrooms on Diaspora, Socio-Pastoral Care in Human Mobility for the Vatican, the GCM, and I'm now doing my Ignatian formation course on really focusing on the migration issue. So thank you, I'm talking a lot, but thank you for all the inputs.
No, thank you, Ms. Grace. I think you've spoken to the point of, the learning never ends. Especially if we still want to be active part of problem solving and in terms of empowering migrants and diaspora, the learning actually from our side never ends. Yes.
Let me add, I'm also trying to get to the local level now and the parish level, multi-sectoral approach. So from everything that I've learned, I learned that we have to start with the locality where they come from. So educating the families even before they think of migrating. They should know what's happening in the Middle East. They should know what's happening to women, because sometimes they don't know. They romanticize migration because they see the big houses, and poor migrants, they don't tell them how they're suffering in the Middle East, that they are in little rooms with curtains. I went to see them when I was ambassador, and oh my God, they don't eat 3 times a day because they don't want to remove any peso from the remittance. So when I talk to the students, the kids, they're crying. I said, your parents, they do this, so be careful with the money that they said. Thank you. God bless.
Indeed, it's a spiral. It's a spiral. I think it comes from also realizing what is provided in terms of decent work and in terms of the working conditions that migrants have, so that you can see effective, meaningful contributions, but also that impact on their lives. Oludare, and then we have Mbemba. Mbemba, you're welcome. Oludare.
Thanks, Paddy. I was on a voyage. I just come back, so I quickly joined the class, and I think I'll miss a substantive part of the class. My question is to you, Paddy. It's not to our facilitators. I just want to ask, because I'm quite anticipatory. Number one, when is the class going to come to an end? Then number 2, we've learned so much, I've gained so much. Then number 2, the certification. When will the certificate be issued, and what format will the certificate be issued? You can delay the answer a bit, maybe after the substantial questions have been asked, then you can just come up with the answer to this.
No worries, Oludare. We are at objective 19, so we still have a few objectives to go before we can finish with the class. And yes, we will be sharing more information. Check the Google Classroom, because we'll put all that information in there as well. But thanks again for joining the class and for being here. Mbemba, please go ahead and share with us.
Thank you very much, Paddy, and all the presenters. This is amazing. I think probably this is something that you should actually look into in terms of the combination of your panel. The women, you actually did a great job today. So the only thing is that today is not a Valentine's Day. Today is 17th. If it is on the 14th, all the men should be sending you flowers today for a job well done. Thank you. I think, like, diaspora engagement, migrant engagement, a bit of a challenge, like when it comes to countries of origin or countries of residence. Like, I know that Basi's question about remittances is a very important question, but first of all is that I think we need to ask the question, are our countries of origin actually ready to engage their diaspora? That's the first question we need to ask, because I know some of the speakers mentioned about diaspora, because we are in different categories. Some are political diasporas, some are diaspora that are bringing remittances, some our government don't even want to see us in the first place. But I think diaspora policy is one thing that is missing in most of these places, like a great policy to actually engage the diaspora, because I've seen few policies. They are not actually talking about how other migrants that are not economically viable are contributing to the countries of origin. or they might actually contribute something like a political economy or maybe social economy. They are not actually talking about it. If you look at most of the diaspora policies, they are only talking about the economy of job creation, remittances, and other stuff. So maybe that's where the question should be first. And then when you look at the countries of residence, well, sometimes they don't even talk about diaspora. Everyone is a migrant. And the policy there is integration policies. The integration policies is actually maybe about language. How do you actually mix with the locals? Education, in fact, is very limited there. So like, those are some of the things I think we need to start a discussion about. How do we actually get our diaspora policies really well done to get our diaspora in all sectors of life, whether it's political, social, economic, but also in countries of residence? How do we influence diaspora, like for example, integration policies? Because they don't actually call it diaspora. Like in Ireland, when you talk about diaspora, it's the Irish diaspora. It's just that ourselves are putting that word there. We are talking about diaspora. But sometimes if you want to overdo that, you actually eliminate the migrant aspect of things, because the migrant rights, you need to actually flag that as well if things goes wrong. So I don't know what the panelists might have in terms of what is the advice there for people who might be on this meeting from governments in the countries of origin and probably in the countries of residence. How do we actually get these things strengthened? So make sure that people actively contribute something to development. Thank you.
Thank you, Bemba, who has joined us before. And I think some of the panelists, I have shared the video from last week or the other week where we had you on, and Bemba is representing Diaspora and is a migration expert based in Ireland. So speaking from a lot of experience between Ireland and the Gambia, but also covering other spaces, but some very valid questions there. We have Faye and Benedict. And then I think we will move to the panelists and have some closing remarks from Professor Binod. Faye, Stan?
Yeah, thank you very much, Paddy. And thanks for the panelists. For me, what I want to say is closely related to what member just said, because it's very interesting. I'm from Nigeria, and I am a postgraduate. I'm a doctoral candidate in diaspora studies and migration studies in the Nigerian University. And it's interesting that the African Union recognizes the African diaspora as the sixth region. Do you understand? But interesting is the fact that, just like members said, most countries just see the diaspora for the sake as people, for the sake of what they have to give. What are they bringing to the table? So the issue is the fact that they are seen as economic contributors, but they are never accepted. Most cases, they are not accepted as political contributors to the different countries. There's an absence. A very good example is Nigeria. Nigerian diaspora community is pretty large, especially if you're talking about the United Kingdom and some parts of Europe. Yet there is no diaspora policy, an official diaspora policy document in Nigeria. So there is nothing to guide the relationship between the diaspora and the government. So you find out that individual and sectoral diaspora contribution is what we have, and it is not easy to measure that in terms of national planning and along those lines. Secondly, is the fact that social remittances is something that people the government fails to leverage. But the social remittances would do so much, yet it is just about economic remittances. And that's why I'm happy that what the Philippines is doing. They recognize the strength of its diaspora community, of its diaspora population, yet it is leveraging it very well. But if you just say these people for what they bring to the table, then how much voice and how much recognition do they have in their homeland? And that is a major lacuna. Considering the fact, I will round up by saying, considering the fact that most people who live out of Nigeria, I will say, based on study, they see diasporic movement or migration out of Nigeria as a status embellishment. It's just to embellish status for economic gains, because more often than not, except for the insecurity that is ravaging some part of the northeastern part of the country, what you have is you really find people. Most people don't go outside the country, but those who go is for status embellishment. So if the government is failing to leverage the opportunity of the social remittances, then it's going to fail. And that is why you don't see so much of national, concrete national measurable diaspora contribution from the side of the government that they can measure that this is coming from the diaspora. Is mostly on individual basis. And that is why we're not getting so much from the diaspora, especially in Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vih State, for those reflections. I see Lucia, actually we have a hand from Lucia, and then Lucia. Chantal also has a hand up. If we can give them within a minute or two so that our panelists could respond.
Yeah, hello, good morning, afternoon, or good evening. I'll go straight to the question. Firstly, I would like to thank you all for your presentations. They really made me think a lot, and especially as a young master's student, that's quite interesting, all the points you brought up to the table. And I'd like to know if you could please elaborate a little bit on the role, the mechanisms of the African Union on diaspora engagement, please. And here I think both on the situation and conditions of recent migrants, and also the historical migrants, especially in the Americas, but not necessarily. And that's my question. Thank you so much.
Lucia, thank you for that question. I see we still have Mbemba in the room, so I may put him on the spot on that question on the African Union, because he carries an important hat, and he's done some important work in that space. So Mbemba, if you are comfortable to take that, just let me know at some point. Chantal had a hand up. Otherwise, if not, we can start with Mbemba giving reflections on that very last question, and then we take a tour de table around for our panelists. Chantal, are you available?
I'm not sure if the question is relevant to what is being discussed, but I am interested in what mechanisms are in place for migrants who wish to move back to their country of origin. What kind of support can they expect from the diaspora to do that, to reintegrate to their home of residence, former residence?
I think that's an interesting question, and maybe one of our panelists can take that on. Mbemba, can we have you on for the African Union question, and then we take a tour de table around for our panelists. Mbemba first.
Yeah, the African Union is doing a lot in terms of a diaspora engagement. They actually have a unit called CIDO, which is based in Addis. And then they have regional offices as well for Europe, Asia, and other areas as well. But I just think that sometimes their work is also limited in the sense that they are only talking to groups that are formally recognized. And then I think this raises also another issue of, like panelists mentioned, some groups, people who are not within groups or groups that are not actually affiliated to other things. They might be political groups. So these groups are not actually reach out by the African Union. So it's kind of a setup. It's a new one, CIDO. They are limited in terms of staff, but they are doing a bit of work. I actually sit on one of the committees in the African Union Commission, the Labor Migration Advisory Committee. So they engage African diaspora members in some of the committees they have, whether it's gender, security, and others. So they are trying their best. But I think what they lack also is the connection. So sometimes we don't need to sit down and wait for them to connect with us. So we need to raise questions, probably even with other networks, like for example, ADEP, the Africa-Europe Diaspora Development Platform in Brussels, that do some work with them and other networks to reach out to them and see what is happening. So that's the only way we could do to reach out to them and see what do we need. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mbemba, for shedding light on that response. And now let's just take some time. Theresa, do you want to kick us off with some of your final thoughts and some of the reflections you've had after listening to participants share?
Well, for me, what stood out and the kind of questions that came out, it looks like everyone is tired of hearing only about remittance for the diaspora. People want more because these are actually humans who have left their countries to work. They have every kind of need or emotion that people back home have. So it's important to recognize them as people who are agents of development in their homeland and in their countries of origin. So I think it's about time we talk more about other areas in which we can help in diaspora engagement. It's a wide net. You can talk about philanthropy, humanitarianism, arts and culture, even food. Food could be like a game changer. You know, we know about Chinese food. We know about, it's a brand. So it's all about what we think, how we can change the narrative. Obviously, I'm biased towards the media, so I would go for, you know, using the media as a tool more and more to engage all different stakeholders. And yes, if we are able to be holistic about the approach and engage everyone, bottom up, bottom, or whichever way it is, but it should involve everyone. And I believe, yeah, it's actually happening, but not on a big scale. So we need more people to, you know, get involved, change the mindset. That's why we need panel discussions like the ones that you're having right now. Yeah, so thank you. And thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Theresa, for sharing with us. Aida.
Thank you, Patty. I would like to reflect upon the questions that I'm not really sure who asked them, but I think they're very important, which is, are countries ready to engage with their diasporas, and why are social remittances not leveraged? And I'd like to point also to what you said about the ruling, you know, you set the scene of the ruling party, a member comes to speak to the diaspora event and so forth. They're officially representing the state, but very often the people that this person or this entourage is speaking to, addressing, left that state exactly because of their policies and activities. So we cannot assume that this is automatically a kind of some sort of a symbiotic or synergetic relationship between the state and its diaspora. Very often it's conflicting. Very often it's completely antagonistic. Very often it doesn't necessarily have to be on political grounds. It can just be on purely economic grounds. These are people who could not find economic opportunities in their countries, also because of corruption and nepotism and networks that they could not break through. They couldn't find social mobility. They couldn't climb the social ladder in their home state because of all these entrenched obstacles and challenges that they were faced with, that somehow they managed to overcome through great effort and through great sort of courage in their destination countries. Sometimes they couldn't overcome them, but sometimes they managed, and somehow they made a better life for themselves. So we have to be very specific when we talk about this relationship between the state and diaspora. Of course, there are general concepts that do need to be generalized, because then if we don't have concepts to talk about, then it's only individual cases and that we can't have any comparisons. So of course, concepts are important, but one of the reasons why I gave the specific case of one country is to show you the complexity of that one country. Now, I could have made a similar presentation for St. Lucia or for Ghana or for Nigeria, to talk about the complexities of these relationships, where you need to know your diaspora, know why did they leave? I mean, what are the causes of them leaving? What is the relationship between the party in power? What is the relationship between the opposition? What divisions exist in the home state that also were carried over to the diaspora? How were some of these divisions perhaps transcended and new ones formed and so forth? So these are, questions that cannot be approached on a kind of, sort of blank level as how do states engage with their diasporas? So this, and also the question of not leveraging social remittances is also a question of political interest. Sometimes, very often, the ruling party has no interest in leveraging any kind of social remittances, because that would mean that they would lose power. I mean, it's pretty simple as that. So, why are social, but economic, everybody will take American Express. So there's no issue about that, right? Everybody, the remittances, the financial remittances are always welcome. They do not always that same idea does not always translate to political remittances in terms of voting, social remittances in terms of social change. And then we see the obstacles to diaspora members being actual agents of social change, because they do not operate in a vacuum. There is an existing power structure that needs to be understood, first of all, and then later addressed.
Yeah. I think that's one of the critical conditions, and together with one of the organizations that Mbemba was talking about, ADEPT, and GRFDT and others, we did a very interesting webinar on building trust, where we tried to unpack some of these issues as well. And I would invite you to look it up. We'll share the link a little later on. But I think, Aida, I mean, basically we're saying you've got to see what are the trust pillars here. You've got to establish a certain amount of trust before we can even talk about more complex remittances, if you like, the social remittances, the political involvement and engagement. Thanks a lot. Mandy.
Thank you, Paddy. Absolutely everything that Aida's just said there and Theresa has resonated with me. It is to the point that diaspora engagement is only as good as the government of the day. It is a sad state of affairs, and this is why I think it's about time the diaspora itself makes a decision about what it wants and binds together to do that. You cannot leave what you want up to other people, regardless of who it is. And I think that is what we need to take away from here. If we want it done, we have to start doing it ourselves and bring people along with us, as opposed to waiting for it to be bestowed onto us. To the point of St. Lucia, well, the person who asked the question about going back home, I can give you the St. Lucia answer to that. We have the St. Lucia Diaspora Homeland Guide. I've put the link in the chat. This is just from one High Commission or embassy, I think is the Canadian one, but it's the same one used across the island. And it's basically a start at getting people organized to go back home. And if I read just a little bit of what it says the guide serves to provide all the requirements for potential diaspora investors, provide all necessary information to engage in a business venture, outline all steps and procedures for returning nationals, provide a simple web format that is easily uploaded, provide policymakers with a reference document as they seek to reduce administrative barriers and improve avenues for engagement with the diaspora. So we can see here that even while we are encouraging persons to come back home, remittances and investments is still the talk of the day. And I think it sells St. Lucia, I can't speak to any other country, but I think it sells St. Lucia short because we are so good at the social aspects of things. We just don't celebrate it enough. And I will end with that. If we don't celebrate what we are doing, we leave it to other people to decide who we are.
Very powerful. Thank you, Mandy, for that. And I think one of the panelists we should have had today was going to talk about return migration and what that looks like. And I think Chantal's question would have been well answered in there, but I think that guide is sort of important. Mandy, what you just said, we want diaspora to come back, we want migrants to come back, but can they come with something in their hands, please, as they come back home? But some interesting, I think, examples we have seen, for instance, from India, from Kerala, that have shown how we can open that space. And in many other smaller spaces, they're just not enough. But some of these best practices are definitely issues we can take that have gone far above and beyond what national policy has said. So thank you, Mandy, for sharing that. And at this point, I just want to call upon the president of GRFDT, Professor Binod Kadria, to give us some of his reflections, and we'll be closing in a moment.
Thank you, Paddy. Well, I think a fantastic session with a lot of food for thought, lot of food for reflection, and very enlightening and stimulating conversation there. And it takes me back to think what can we do, like Mandy said, and we need to do it ourselves. So what is our strong point? Like for example, we are mentioned, like Aida said, don't be foolhardy to assume that the government or the states do not know what they ought to do. But there are vested interests that why they don't want to do, like patent rights. The industries do not want to bring in new innovations by using the patent rights, because then they would lose their power. So I think we need to understand what this group, the academic group and the group who are engaged in on the ground reality as different from policymakers, need to reflect and find out what is their strength, and that's what has come out from this. And it makes me think in terms of two obsessions that the discourses are loaded with. The one is about the obsession about the remittances. The remittances is not all pervasive, in the sense that when we are talking about diaspora, the diaspora is different from migrants. Diaspora are the settled people. Migrants are still mobile. Migrants are the flow, whereas diaspora is the stock. So we have to differentiate. We should not mix up those. There are overlaps, but we have to be clear in our mind what are the distinctions between them. And the second obsession that we have is that diaspora is only for the homeland development. We have to step out of that obsession now. I think it's time. Some people ask, should diaspora be engaged only with the homeland, or think in a broader canvas? That I think is important. People say that diaspora for the host land. Yes, but we can even get out of that box and think of the global development, of the kind of things that Mandy had mentioned. I'm glad she mentions Sir Arthur Lewis, the Nobel laureate who shared the Nobel Prize with Theodore Schultz, who gave us the concept of human capital. Theodore Schultz is remembered. Arthur Lewis is not, because of the color of the skin, perhaps. He went back to the Caribbean. He was a returnee. We have to, and he gave us the theory of the unlimited supply of labor. And that unlimited supply of labor is actually the root of migration. So we have to connect the dots, and that's what we should do in this classroom. I'm glad that Ambassador Grace has mentioned about being a student again. All of us need to become students again. And that's what has come out of this particular discussion that I could see. I myself, I have reflected a lot. I have recently completed a paper on, I've just shared with my colleagues in GRFDT about the COVID-19 and its relationship with the Objective 19. The 19 is common between the two. And that's where we find that it is the unique objective which puts the onus of contribution on migrants and diaspora, not on the state. The state is only an enabling agency. It is about when we think in theoretical terms, we make a distinction between willingness and ability. So the willingness is with the diaspora, with the migrants, to make them, to empower them, to create those conditions for them to contribute what they are willing to do is more important. And that's where what Mandy said, we have to do it ourselves. We have to take that role onto ourselves. And that I think is very, very important. That needs to be conveyed to IMRF. That's where we have to make this distinction. We need not mix up our categories. Paddy started by asking the question, who is a migrant and who is a diaspora? And I have reflected on that. I have written about that. For example, she mentioned about India's example. I'm from India. India had created the OCI, Overseas Citizenship of India, for the diaspora, those who are no longer Indian citizens and have given up. India does not allow dual citizenship. Now, to bring them back into the development fold, this was created, that they will contribute. The migrants will contribute if they are given this facility of OCI, whereby they can engage in everything that happens in India, excepting standing in elections or to buy plantation properties. Now, what happened as a result, rather than their engagement with the development of the home country, and this I had predicted. Exactly what happened was a large number of migrants, Indian migrants abroad, gave up their Indian passports, became the OCI, they took the citizenship of the other countries, and then they got more disjointed. They became, so we find the reflection, we find the after effects of certain policies which are not anticipated properly. And that's what our role is. We have to anticipate. Politicians and industries and business people are by nature myopic. They cannot see beyond their own nose. It is the activists and the academics who can see beyond 3 generations. And that's where the OCI, I draw this from OCI definition of overseas citizens of India cuts across intergeneration, three generations behind and 3 generations in the future. And the migrant is in the middle, and that's why I call it 7 generations. So 7 generation is 7 is a unique number, and I don't have time to go into those interesting conversations, but I have put it in a footnote in that recent paper of mine, and Paddy has an access to that. You can find very interesting conversation. Why is 7 a celebrated number? You know, we have 7 wonders of the world and 7 years each by Marilyn Monroe and others. So what is this unique number? That I think we need to understand. And for diaspora, the 7 number is very, very important. And I think it is in terms of contribution, I think there were some hints being given here. Remittance, remittance is a dangerous category. It cuts on both sides. Paddy mentioned about Kerala, but go to Kerala and see how divided that development is. The villages are split between 2, those who receive remittances and those who don't. They have, jazzy houses and things like that. It's not going into health. It's not going into higher education. So the dark side of the remittance is very important. How remittance is created, like many of you said, you have seen in Middle East how they starve, how they have a target saving, and to get to the target saving, they deprive themselves. So I had said this in GFMD in Mauritius, that let us not forget that remittances are seeped in the sweat and blood of the migrants. That is the counterpart of the celebration of remittances. We also celebrate the diaspora. India started celebrating diaspora from 2003 by designating a particular day in a year, 9th of January, as the Indian Expatriates Day, the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas. And that was to mark the return of Mahatma Gandhi from South Africa to India. So it is a returnee. So we have to, draw lessons from history, from theory, and so on. And this is what this particular session has inspired me to think about. And I think that is something that we can take back with us. I think we need to think about the GCM and put our categories. We have to distance ourselves. We have to take abstraction from reality and theorize and think what are the categories that we have. If we should speak from the point of strength, what is our strength, and not from weaknesses. That I think is very, very important. And that has come out from this. All the 3 panelists have contributed so much. The digital technology is so important, because if we think of the technology, traditional technology transfer by the migrants, that was a losing game, because what technology the receiving countries were getting from the migrants was obsolete technology in the name of appropriate technology. But when we come to digital technology, perhaps that can be changed. So that is very, very important. We need to think out of the box by drawing lessons from this session. That I think, Paddy, is something that I have a lot to speak about. I'm sorry that we don't have time for those reflections, but this sets the stage for taking these lessons to the IMRF. I think we need to be conscious of that our objective now is to bring it to the notice of those who matter. And by the way, there is this, we find this being resonated, that the IMRF is again going to be a closed door consultation and discussion. The civil society is going to be on the fringe, listening rather than speaking. But let us speak here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Binod, on sharing those reflections. I think it was it brought some refreshing thoughts, but I think resonated with a lot of what our panelists have shared today. Many thanks for going into the depth that the limited time could allow. but I'm sure that we will have an opportunity also next week when we're looking at GCM 20, which looks at remittances. By the way, even though we're tired of talking about remittances, the GCM decided to give a whole objective to remittances and financial inclusion. So I hope that the panelists here, the participants here, can join us next Tuesday when we try to unpack what that looks like, because it has a whole life of its own. But really great that we have had the opportunity here with Aida, Mandy, and Theresa to just dive into migrant and diaspora contributions, and also talk about some of the difficulties that are there. And as Professor Binod has highlighted in the various points that he has shared, we are operating within a bigger and global ecosystem. So we're hoping to take some of these reflections with us from the research side, but also working, as you know, the course has civil society organizations as part of it. And we kind of collectively join together in what is called the People's Migration Challenge. And under that vehicle, but also in the vehicle of research, we hope to bring our voices loud, even though the windows will be shut. I'm sure people will have to open a door at some point to listen to the noise coming from outside. I think we can be inspired, for instance, by the demonstrations we have seen. I don't know, some of you who've seen the demonstrations in New Zealand, where it became a musical concert. But the louder the music that came from the parliament, the louder the crowd and innovative they became. So, you know, how do we still allow ourselves to keep singing, even though we think nobody is listening? Because at some point, somebody has to listen, and we have that foot at that table where decisions are being made. But thank you to the panelists for sharing from your vast experiences and from your very specific worlds on this particular topic. Thank you to all the participants that engage with us every Tuesday, every Thursday on the GCM webinar series, and we hope to see you again next week. Thank you and goodbye.